let's jump into it. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
So what is, Larry, what's your very first memory ever of the Daytona 500?
Well, it's an interesting story because I didn't really come from a racing background. I was an only child. My mom and dad could care less about racing. But my aunt and my uncle, my mom's sister and her husband were big race fans. And even when I was in grammar school, the three of us would go to the local track there in Birmingham and watch the local races every Friday night. So I was still a junior in high school. It was in 1976. And we got the wild hair that we wanted to go to Daytona and watch the Daytona 500. And my uncle had a pickup truck, so a good friend of mine, and before of us, we pitched in, I don't know how much it was, 25, 30 bucks a piece, and just rented a camper shell to put in the back of his pickup truck to go to Daytona, and that was going to be our accommodations. So we headed down there, and we had no tickets, and the grandstands were not the size that they are today. There were not that many tickets available. But we found out once we got down there on Saturday morning that at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, they put on about 2,500 unreserved tickets on sale. But the way you were going to have to get those, you couldn't walk up there at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning and get them. There were people that were already Saturday afternoon, had their lawn chairs and lounge chairs in line to buy these tickets. So I don't know if anyone else was up to it, but I said, you know what, I'll be the sacrificial lamb. If you guys would just come relieve me every once in a while where I can go use the restroom or get a little something to eat or drink, I'll sit in this line tonight and I'll get those tickets come 6 a.m. in the morning. So I slept, sat, read in a lounge chair all night long, probably from about 8 or 9 o'clock Saturday night until the tickets went on sale at 6 o'clock the next morning. To buy those 4 grandstand seats, and they were not very good seats. They were all the way down in the bottom of turn 1, but the good thing is we had tickets to my very first ever Daytona 500.
Wow. Now that was in 1976, right?
Yeah. Now here's the interesting thing about the 76 500 is we were pretty aggressive, the 4 of us. So when the green flag dropped, we were sitting in our seats in turn 1. It had to be about row 2 or 3. I mean, we could see, you know, coming out of the tri-oval, turn 1 and 2, and headed on the backstretch. But we got a little aggressive. As the race progressed, we kind of just kept working our way to better seats. You know, it really wasn't seats. We were probably more standing in aisleways and behind the grandstands. But the neat thing is, by the time the checkered flag waved, if you'll remember when Richard Petty and David Pearson wrecked each other coming to the checkered flag, we were sitting probably 50 yards away from the start-finish line. So we started off not having very good seats, but by the time that 500-mile race ended, we had great seats to watch the finish of that race.
Well, so then you actually got into the NASCAR community. Talk about your very first experience of being on the pit crew.
Yeah, I went to Daytona with the first NASCAR team that I was working for in 1981. It was Rogers Leasing Racing, a very small, somewhat underfunded team out of Greenville, South Carolina. But I can still remember riding in the cab of that truck, going into that garage area for the very first time, and not as a spectator, not as a fan, but as actual mechanic on a Sprint Cup Series race car. Had a driver, he was a local driver from Greenville, Don Sprouse, was going to drive the race car. We qualified for the 500, didn't qualify that well, but that was back in the day when it was not unusual, 55, 60 cars to show up for that 40-something car field. So it was pretty cool just to make the 500. And the sad part is, poor old Don, he gave out about halfway through the race. So Kyle Petty had an engine failure, so Kyle Petty actually got in a 37 car and finished the race for us. We finished 20th, and of course his dad won the race, which I think was Richard's 7th and final Daytona 500 win in '81.
Wow, that's so cool. These stories are great.